This first Chicago Bears season with Ben Johnson as head coach made it clear what the big decisions are going to be this offseason and what this team needs to make a priority in free agency and the NFL draft.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to apply some of the lessons we learned about this Bears team and this new direction of the franchise this season and make that shape what the offseason is going to bring, where some of the biggest decisions are going to come on both sides of the ball, both in terms of the players they need to decide as far as on the roster and returning free agents, but also external moves of where this team needs to invest and continue to get better. And I think you'll find that the sides of each side of the ball, Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen, are in very different situations that'll shape very different decisions for them throughout the offseason here that I think will make it pretty clear where the priorities need to be and where maybe they'll take it a little bit more easy. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel Sportsbook. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. But on yesterday's podcast, we talked about some of the things we learned in Ben Johnson's first season of the Chicago Bears, what we learned about the different position groups and the different coaches and kind of where that leads the team heading into the offseason. And now I want to take that and apply that forward and say, okay, based on what we learned this season, how will that shape some of the big decisions facing this Bears team? And I think what I came away with most clearly from the Bears offense, we talked to briefly summarize about how, that was just a group that clearly can perform at a high level, but wasn't always doing it. And it was still just sort of learning the ropes and making some mistakes along the way, but some young players and everyone trying to acclimate. I think the big lesson for this offseason that we can approach is change the Bears offense as little as possible from a personnel standpoint. So much of what hampered this Bears team this past season was guys learning along the way, right? The learning curve, the mistakes, and more of the self-inflicted wounds. Rarely, if ever, did the Bears offense come into a situation where there was, say, a talent deficiency. You could make an argument that that was the case at times at left tackle, especially before Ozzie Trapillo settled into that role and then after Ozzie Trapillo was injured for that final game. But that's really the only position on offense where you felt every once in a while the other team's going to have a better player that's going to win that matchup. So I don't come away from this season and enter the offseason feeling wow, we learned this year that the Bears really got to get better at this position on offense. All the pieces are there. And so I think the biggest key for their success going into 2026 is keeping everything together. Because I think every new piece that you even just add in to the offense, even if you're not subtracting along the way, but just adding, you're going to add other wide receivers in there. You're going to add more offensive line depth, maybe some different running back depth or whatever it might be. But every piece that you add to this Bears offense will start from square one. They will start where everybody started last offseason. And you saw that as the Bears went through their first year in Ben Johnson's offense, there were mistakes almost across the board, right? Wide receivers miscommunicating with the quarterback, not always running routes to the right spot or the right depth or the right timing, and quarterback throwing to one spot thinking a receiver would be there, or just all sorts of different variations of miscommunications there. And obviously, drop passes are a different animal, but same thing on the offensive line with early on run blocking and guys trying to kind of fit together and figure out how they're supposed to pass off double team blocks and even exchange stunts and blitzes in pass protection. It just took time for those guys. And the mistakes came from, everyone's still new and still learning, as opposed to, the talent just isn't good enough there. And so any new player you bring in starts back at zero in terms of catching up and learning the communication, learning the continuity, learning the system, and trying to get on the same page as everyone else. The advantage for the Bears offense for 2026 will be all of the time that they work together in 2025. That was the big thing holding them back, was that lack of experience playing together. And so I want to disrupt what they have built there as little as possible to make sure that Caleb isn't having to spend a lot of time acclimating with new wide receivers or new tight ends or even new running backs, that your offensive linemen don't have to spend a bunch of time acclimating. Okay, it's a new starter here, so now I got to learn how to sort of communicate and work with him. And you reset that clock a little bit that you made so much progress on over the course of this past season. Like if the Bears were to go out and trade away DJ Moore and trade away Cole Kmet and replace DeAndre Swift with a new running back and bring in a new left tackle, like all of a sudden, so that's a bunch of new moving parts that will take time to settle in. And then you'll spend 2026 seeing those types of players make a lot of the same types of mistakes that everyone else was making in 2025. Like this next season, you want to be past all of the mistakes. And not to say that there won't be any mistakes, but just you want to be past most of the self-inflicted wound type mistakes that should be fixed with time on task and experience. So I would be not eager at all to subtract anything from the Bears offense. Now, to subtract 0 from the offense is probably unrealistic, but when you look at the current structure as far as like the depth chart and who's under contract for next season, there doesn't have to be a lot of significant change. As far as free agents on offense that you might end up replacing, quote unquote, at wide receiver, Olamide Zaccheaus and Devin Duvernay were both on 1-year deals, so they are expiring contracts that you could potentially replace. So your number 4, number 5 receiver, maybe Ja'Day Walker could plug in as the number 4, so it might just be your number 5, number 6 wide receiver. Could be in that conversation. Your number 3 running back in Travis Homer, your number 3 tight end in Durham Smythe, and your number 3 quarterback in Case Keenum. But like these are all end of the depth chart backups that don't need to play significant roles on offense. We saw Zaccheaus play probably the biggest role of anybody I mentioned there, probably followed by Durham Smythe. But so there's going to be some turnover in those spots. Presumably, they're not just going to re-sign all of those guys I mentioned, plug them right back in, and really run it back with that whole crew. I should mention as well, some backup offensive linemen, also free agents. Braxton Jones, Jordan McFadden, Ryan Bates in there. So like there could be some turnover in that group, but all of your starters on offense are set to return next season on contracts that are at least reasonable, right? You're not looking at it, wow, what a huge salary cap casualty that they might need to make at any of those given spots. We've talked a couple times already this week on the podcast about the potential for a DJ Moore trade. We went more in depth on, I think, Tuesday's podcast, but the days kind of blend together. It might have been Wednesday's podcast. So if you want more specifics on the DJ Moore trade situation, you can go back and take a listen to that. But I wouldn't be eager to move on, because if you move on, then you got to replace him with someone, and it's either a lesser player from internal on the roster or an external player who's got to catch up. That doesn't mean no adding any more outside players. For sure, if you're in the draft and there's a receiver you like in the 3rd or 4th round or whatever, go for it. You can never have too many good players. I'm not anti-adding anything to the Bears offense, but let's not create new problems of new players trying to catch up and plug in. Like a number 3 running back, a number 3 tight end, a number 5 wide receiver, that's fine. I can survive if those guys aren't still quite on the same page as Caleb Williams this season. That's a normal ebb and flow. But while you've got all this continuity built into the offense because everyone's still under contract, take advantage of that, because it's rare in the NFL that you kind of keep that same nucleus around for a bunch of seasons consecutively. And even after this season, even if you bring everybody back for 2026, by the time you get to 2027, there's going to be conversations again about DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, and then DeAndre Swift's contract will be up at that point, I believe, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's hard to keep this together. So keep it together now and get the best version of this Bears offense in 2026 with this core nucleus. Now, I think on the other side, defense is going to be a very different story. Well, I don't think we're going to see a ton of change on the offense. I think we could see a surprising amount of change to this Bears defense based on what we saw from them this past season. So we'll take a look at what the lessons from 2025 taught us about how this Bears defense may change in the 2026 offseason next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever just to hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just make sure you file by February 28th to get that deal. Take taxes off of your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap just feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer with FanDuel, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. So make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So while this Bears offense is going to stick together and shouldn't go through too much change, the defense, on the other hand, feels like something that's going to have a lot more of it as Dennis Allen works to get his guys more in the mix. Because I think when we entered last offseason, there wasn't a ton of opportunity for Dennis Allen to tweak much of the Bears' defensive lineup. Like, they gave him the opportunity. They go out and sign Dio Odengbo and go out and sign Grady Jarrett. And I don't want to understate those and pretend that those are small things. But when I think about the Bears' defensive lineup from the year before Dennis Allen got here to the year Dennis Allen did get here, those two guys were really the only new faces for the week one starting lineup. Obviously, injuries and other guys get involved, but it was going to be the same secondary of Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, and Tyreek Stevenson competing with Terrell Smith, and Nashawn Wright was a new face, but they didn't sign Nashawn Wright thinking he was going to step in and be your day one starting cornerback. It just turned out that way. But same safeties, same cornerbacks, plus Nashawn Wright worked his way in there, same linebackers, and mostly the same defensive line. Just, again, Dio and Grady Jarrett in there. So, he kind of had to inherit this defense and work with what he had. They didn't have a lot of flexibility to change out some starters. They added a couple free agent pieces, but for the most part, that was all they could do. Now, Dennis Allen is in more of a position, if he wants to get rid of some guys and get more of his guys in there. They don't have an abundance of salary cap space necessarily to do it, but they do have players that are more flexible to get rid of. We just talked about with the Bears offense about how, hey, everyone's under contract and you want to just keep it rolling with those guys. The defense has a lot more free agents coming up and also more guys whose contracts you can get out of if you want to, with a little bit more, I don't want to say ease, but how about a little bit less of a financial burden if you do want to get out of it. So, first and foremost, from a free agent standpoint, we've talked before on this podcast about how all of your safeties from this season are all set to be free agents. Jaquan Brisker, Kevin Byard, Elijah Hicks, Jonathan Owens. But then at cornerback, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Nick McLeod, Jalen Jones, those guys are gone. Your starters are all still under contract. And Nashawn Wright as well. On my visual graphic here, I didn't have him highlighted, but he's also a free agent. And then at linebacker, DeMarco Jackson will be a free agent again. Jalen Reeves-Maven is a free agent again. And along the defensive line, Dominique Robinson and Andrew Billings and Joe Tryon-Shanka and Daniel Hardy and Chris Williams and Jonathan Ford. There's certainly starters that are coming back, but a lot of opportunity to change over this roster, especially when you add in the idea that, hey, you could cut Tremaine Edmonds and save $15 million in salary cap space. Like, that's a very real possibility here. Given the injury that TJ Edwards suffered late in this process, you could work towards a potential injury settlement if you really wanted to get rid of him, although they just gave him the contract extension, so I don't think that's as likely there specifically. But like Montez Sweat's contract, I don't think they wouldn't want to just release Montez Sweat. He's too valuable to replace, but like they can afford to from a salary cap standpoint. Like Dennis Allen has some malleability for his defense, especially maybe it's obvious to say, but like he can bring in whatever safeties he wants. Like he inherited all 4 of those guys from the year before. Those were all Matt Eberflus safeties. Eberflus drafted Jaquan Brisker. Eberflus signed Kevin Byard. Eberflus drafted Elijah Hicks, brought in Jonathan Owens. Now I think Dennis Allen chose to bring back Hicks and Owens, but I think part of this process was like, Dennis Allen can watch them on tape, but he's got to get them in the building and see, okay, how well do they respond to these different things that I'm going to call? Because Dennis Allen called a very different style of defense than what Matt Eberflus did. So it wasn't necessarily fair to look at their Eberflus tape and automatically assume here's how they're going to fit into Dennis Allen's defense. Now he has seen that and has a sense of like, who was the right fit and who maybe I would prefer, if it's easy enough to move on from anyway, who might I prefer to change out? So I think safety is going to end up being priority number 1 anywhere on the roster this offseason. Not only because of the fact that they're all free agents, but also because during the season, we heard Ben Johnson specifically talk about how important he thinks the safety position is on defense. We've heard Dennis Allen talk about it as well. Like, I think this is a spot where they look at leadership from the back end of the defense and also just like what those guys give you on the deep end informs then what coverage you can run in front of it, how much you can blitz in front of it, right? The versatility of your safeties to step up in man coverage versus cover deep changes everything for this scheme. So that's not to say that, Dennis Allen then is for sure going to change out those safeties and, get 2 brand new guys in there. There seems to be a real desire to at least bring back Kevin Byard, is what it sounds like from Ryan Poles' perspective. But I like the chances that Jaquan Brisker probably plays elsewhere in 2026 and that the Bears' second starting safety next to Byard may end up being someone else. And that doesn't have to mean that, Brisker was therefore a bad fit in Dennis Allen's defense, but it's more so, is Brisker at that price worth it? That, that maybe a player like Brisker's not a bad fit, but you could get someone who is an even better fit and maybe doesn't cost quite as much. I mean, that's kind of the equation that they're trying to work through in their head. Like, okay, we like Brisker at a certain price, but if 2 guys cost similarly and one's a better fit than Brisker, then you're going to go get that guy. Or, that's where I think we are going to see some changes at safety. And I wonder about linebacker too, just because one of the lessons we talked about on yesterday's podcast was that despite injuries to both TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds at different points this season, it wasn't like a humongous, drastic drop-off at linebacker. There was a drop-off for sure, but like we saw DeMarco Jackson coming off the street and look like a starting caliber linebacker in this defense. It's someone who I would be surprised if they didn't bring back, and I wouldn't be stunned if they said, you're a starter week 1, 2026. That like it's DeMarco Jackson and TJ Edwards or whatever combination they might want to do, especially just given that Edmonds is the 3rd highest paid linebacker in football. Very little of his salary is guaranteed. You would save $15 million in cap space if you cut Tremaine Edmonds. You would have to then replace him and use some of that $15 million in space to replace him. So like it's not a net $15 million more to spend on other players, but it certainly is a big savings for at a position where when he wasn't out there, you got by fine without him. So you could get a player who costs half as much and get maybe close to or just as good of a quality of play and use the rest of that money to improve your roster elsewhere. Like it just didn't feel like linebacker was a critical position in this Bears defense that they could just kind of run through. Jalen Reeves-Maybin and DeMarco Jackson and even Noah Sewell got by at times. Like whether that's them just being really good at scouting linebackers or not valuing linebacker or not needing great linebackers in the scheme, like it doesn't matter either way. They don't need them. So whether they can just find a better one that's cheap because they're good at scouting them, or whether they know it's not that important to have a great linebacker in this defense so they can plug in whoever, functionally, it's the same decision this offseason. Dennis Allen can kind of get who he wants in there. Maybe he decides Edmonds and Edwards are the guys he wants, but I'm skeptical that that's exactly how it's going to play out here. Same thing at safety. Like maybe he decides he wants both of them, but I'm skeptical that he's going to keep both. And it wouldn't stun me if neither safety ended up coming back. I think it's more likely that Byard will and Brisker won't, but I think a lot of different moves are on the table, especially at those spots on the defense. Now, defensive line and cornerback are a little bit different, but I do think there's room for changes at both of those spots, but it might be less wholesale new starters and more about tweaking things here and there. So we'll take a look at like how the play we saw this season from the defensive line and the cornerbacks that were both areas of weakness for various reasons, how that might shape what the Bears do at those positions this offseason. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. And when you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites, because Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. That's Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. So while safety and linebacker have the potential to make a big difference in terms of moves this offseason, changing things over, they've got less flexibility and malleability on the defensive line and at the cornerback spot, where at least at the top of the depth chart, you feel a little bit more locked in. But I think one of the lessons we took away from the defensive line in particular that we talked about on yesterday's podcast was that that was a group that the Bears took some risks on and largely underachieved, right? I mean, Austin Booker showed some flashes there. And again, we kind of talked about this on yesterday, so we don't have to rehash the whole thing. But obviously, Dio Dangbo was a huge disappointment and then got hurt. Grady Jarrett was injured from the start and never really came around and played all that well. And even Montez Sweat I think he was good, but wasn't the great player that you needed. And Billings took a step back, and Dexter had some ups and downs along the way. And so I think the lesson for this offseason, if I'm Dennis Allen and Ryan Poles, I'm looking at this saying, I can't take gambles on this defensive line. I need as sure of a thing as I can get. Recognizing that free agency especially, and also the NFL draft, there are no sure things, and that they are all some amount of gambles. But I think what I'm looking for here, and what I think the takeaway needs to be for this offseason, is don't sign a guy, or even in some cases draft a guy, expecting what you get from him in 2026 to be a lot different than what you got from him in 2025, or what you saw from him in 2025. Because that was the case with both Grady Jarrett and Dio Odangbo in particular, where they signed Odangbo and said, listen, this is a young edge rusher. He was 25, 26 when they signed him. He only had 3 sacks this past season, but he's going to come to Chicago, get developed another year in the NFL, and you're looking for him to take that next step forward, even though he didn't do it this past season. He had more sacks the year before, but he'd never been a high-end productive starting defensive end in the NFL. It was a risk to say, we're gambling on him paying off. He hadn't proven it consistently up to that point, certainly in his most recent season. Lo and behold, didn't take that step forward. Grady Jarrett, different stage of his career, but same idea, where the most recent thing we had seen from Grady Jarrett, not that great in Atlanta down the stretch, but if he couldn't come to Chicago, they'll put better players around him, he'll be on a better defense, they'll let him get more rest, more breaks, he'll be fresher, and he can have a bounce back year in Chicago, even though the last thing we had seen from him was not that great of play. So both of those players, you were hoping for, looking for, dare I say, expecting them to take a step forward, and they didn't. And so I'm looking for any addition they make to the defensive line to be someone who you know what you're getting, or at least you have a better sense of what you're getting. Because again, there's no such thing as a sure thing, but like, give me a player who was consistent and productive in 2025 that you're fairly confident will continue to be consistent and productive in 2026. Like, give me maybe more of a veteran, more of a proven pass rusher, right? I realize like there's some downfalls the older you get. Like, people have pointed out a Khalil Mack or a Joey Bosa, right? Guys that are in their 30s where there's a chance that even though they were productive this past season, they could drop off. But if it's a 1-year deal, I can live with that. But I don't want another Dayo Odengbo, or I don't want a player who struggled at all in 2025 and all of a sudden I need to hope and pray that they're better in 2026. I think in some ways it's a little bit similar in the NFL draft, but not as extreme, where it's like, does that mean, you're not going to draft a project pass rusher because they're going to take too long? I mean, I'm not going to have a hard and fast rule about it, but you'd love to have a guy who's been productive at college that you hope can be productive quickly in the NFL, as opposed to like, this was the debate last year, right? With Shamar Stewart was the edge rusher. He got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals that people were debating, where, height, weight, speed freak, but had like 2 or 3 sacks in his career. And it was like, well, do you draft him because he's got all the tools and make him figure it out? Or do you go after one of these other pass rushers? Like the other one was Mykel Williams, who went to the 49ers, who had a bunch of sacks but didn't have the high ceiling. Like, I think the Bears are in a position right now where, you don't want to go all in on the present. You don't want to eschew the future for someone who, like, if you truly think he's got this high ceiling that can be special, then get the better player. But like, if all else is equal, give me more of the sure thing who can make more of an impact, because you're hitting a Super Bowl window right now, especially on this defensive line where you've already got young guys that you're counting on getting better. Like, you're banking on the future of Odengbo, the future of Austin Booker, right? These guys need to be better in the future. So give me guys that are going to be better right now, particularly on the defensive line. Cornerback is less about like instant versus future production and more like, hey, at the cornerback spot, we learned this season you cannot have too many cornerbacks. So absolutely keep adding at that position. Like, under contract right now, you've got Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, Tyreek Stevenson, and I think Josh Blackwell. Give me 4 more at a minimum, right? Whether that's re-signing CJ Gardner-Johnson. I mean, Deshaun Wright will be long gone. I don't want to see Nick McLeod brought back, but like, give me as many guys as you can with any kind of experience there, because Jalen Johnson has an injury history. Kyler Gordon now has an injury history. Tyreek Stevenson has a doghouse history. And Terrell Smith, I forgot about him. He's in the mix as well. So another cornerback under contract. He now has an injury history. Like, you don't want to plan on those guys being hurt, but you got to be ready for it. Like, you're not going to assume that they're going to miss a bunch of games, but you got to be ready for it and get Dennis Allen his kind of guys at cornerback, knowing that you might have to rotate through 4, 5, or 6 of them as the season goes on. There's no such thing as too many of them, even though you're hoping and thinking Jalen will be healthy 100% again, that we never really saw all of last season. We never saw Kyler Gordon 100% all last season. When those guys are healthier, the secondary in the cornerback room should be a lot better. Get me more. You can't just count on Stevenson and Terrell Smith and Zay Frazier to compete and be like, go get more. Give me more guys, because they were all hurt this past season. Overload the cornerback position. And then finally, I'll throw in here, like, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, so I don't want to rehash it, but like, get me a real kicker and a real punter to compete with Torrey Taylor and Cairo Santos. Like, not just a camp body that doesn't have a shot at making the roster, but like a real kicker with some real talent and a real punter with some real talent. That doesn't mean you go out and spend a bunch of money in free agency, or that you use a 4th round pick on another punter or kicker, but like, either get a cheaper veteran free agent or a late round draft pick. It can be an undrafted rookie free agent, but like, make it feel like a priority. Like, go get a guy, pay him a little bit, not just, the Division III kicker that is sitting out on the street that you can pay peanuts to have another leg in camp, but doesn't really have a shot at the roster. Push those guys. They weren't good enough in 2025. Push them to be better. They'll probably win their camp battles anyway, but like, give them some real competition. That was sort of the special teams lesson that applies to this upcoming Bears offseason. But I think for a team that was really successful and doesn't have a bunch of salary cap space, could be some action and some real changes happening this offseason, at least on one side of the ball. And whatever changes the Bears make, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you right here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you are one of those everyday listeners that tunes in 5 days a week, thank you so much. I mean, you're the lifeblood of what we do. No matter how much you tune in, I really appreciate it. But if you want to take your listening to the next level, you can check out our new Everydayer Club that gets you access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Bears. It's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcasting app. Plus, it gives you access to a Locked On Everydayers Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. You want to find out more? Go to lockedonbears.supercast.com. You can always find that link in the description for the show wherever you are tuning in. Make sure you come on back on Monday to break down whatever happens in the Bears world over the weekend. And along the way, we're going to make sure that you get another opportunity to bear down.